The Mongol Empire is often remembered for its brutal conquests and piles of human skulls. But the real story of its rise and fall is an economic one, centered on the first truly globalized economy and the invention of a financial magic that would ultimately lead to its destruction. Genghis Khan and his descendants built the Internet of the 13th century, creating a zone of safety known as the Pax Mongolica, where a merchant carrying a sack of gold could travel from the Pacific Ocean to the Black Sea without fear of harm. Before the Mongols thundered onto the scene, the Silk Road was a fragmented death trap of local bandits and greedy rulers who strangled commerce with exorbitant taxes and petty tribal wars, making it nearly impossible for goods to move across continents. When the Mongol horsemen unified these disparate lands, they didn't just loot and move on. They integrated everything into a single management system that allowed merchants to travel without crossing border checkpoints or dealing with different currencies. They standardized weights and measures and slashed taxes across the continent because they realized that commerce, not plunder, was the true source of infinite wealth for their sprawling empire. To hold this massive territory together, they invented the yam, a continental relay system with fresh horses and supply stations every 20 to 30 miles, which acted like a supercharged pony express. A Mongol rider carrying a specialized passport called a paisa was given absolute priority on the road, allowing critical messages and economic data to fly across the empire at speeds of up to 200 miles per day. This logistics network ensured that the Great Khan sitting in Beijing could know the price of grain in Baghdad before the local governors did, providing the backbone for a truly globalized economy. The relay stations were meticulously maintained with hot food and beds, ensuring that the horses were always rested and the information flow was constant across mountains and plains. They were nomads who recognized their own limitations, so they initiated a forced brain drain, relocating brilliant accountants, engineers, and master craftsmen from conquered lands to where their skills were needed most. Persian accountants were sent to China to overhaul the tax code. Chinese engineers built irrigation systems in the Middle East, and master silversmiths from Russia were identified and valued for their expertise. They even brought French goldsmiths to the Mongol capital of Karakoram to create intricate art, while Muslim administrators managed the complex financial systems of the empire. This cross-pollination of genius gave the world gunpowder, advanced mathematics, and Italian pasta, which was originally inspired by Chinese noodle-making techniques that traveled west along the newly secured roads. However, this booming global trade created a massive unexpected problem because the economy was growing faster than the physical supply of copper coins could handle. Caravans were getting too large to haul around tons of metal coins, and the system was becoming a victim of its own success, requiring a more abstract way to transact value. Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, introduced a radical solution that would turn paper into gold by creating the Chao, the world's first true fiat currency. Made from the bark of mulberry trees that was meticulously treated and cut into uniform rectangles, the Chao was not backed by gold or silver, but by the sheer authority of the Khan himself. To ensure the world took this promise seriously, every note featured a grim warning that counterfeiters would be decapitated, making the authority of the currency absolute and enforced by the sword. For a few glorious decades, this system worked beautifully, as the state printed money to fund social safety nets, providing grain to provinces hit by famine or floods. Kublai became a patron of the arts and sciences, funding advancements in medicine and literature while building the Grand Canal's northern extension to secure Beijing's food supply. Merchants loved the relief of carrying a fortune neatly folded in their pocket instead of hauling 500 pounds of heavy, cumbersome metal that attracted bandits on the road. Even Marco Polo was stunned by this alchemy, describing how the Khan could buy anything and pay for anything with simple pieces of paper that no one dared refuse on pain of death. He wrote about how the Khan had seemingly mastered the ancient art of creating wealth out of the bark of trees, allowing the empire to embark on monumental projects without needing to mine a single ounce of copper. But the power of the printing press came with a seductive addiction that was impossible to break once the spending started to spiral out of control. Kublai Khan possessed an ego that matched his empire, and he launched a series of incredibly expensive military campaigns to conquer the island nation of Japan. He ordered the construction of massive fleets of thousands of ships and hired tens of thousands of sailors, paying for every single resource with millions of freshly printed paper notes. Disaster struck in 1274 when a massive typhoon, which the Japanese called the kamikaze or divine wind, smashed the Mongol fleet to pieces and sent its entire treasury to the bottom of the ocean. Instead of reconsidering the invasion, the Khan doubled down and fired up the printing presses to build an even larger second fleet that met the exact same watery fate years later. These failed invasions were a catastrophic economic blow, costing trillions of dollars in modern terms as entire forests in Korea and China were felled to build ships that now sat at the bottom of the sea. When a ship sinks, the tangible wealth of wood, iron, and grain is destroyed, but the paper claims on those goods remain in circulation, creating a massive demand-pull inflation scenario where too much money chases too few goods. The government continued to spend relentlessly on bloated court bureaucracies, lavish palaces in the new capital of Daedu, and massive bribes to keep the restless Mongol princes loyal on the steppes. Thousands of officials, eunuchs, and hangers-on lived lives of incredible luxury on the government's payroll, fueled by the seemingly endless supply of paper money. By 1287, the court had dipped into the actual silver reserves that were supposed to back the currency, and they were forced to issue a new version of the Chao. They declared that one of these new notes was worth 5 of the old ones, effectively robbing savers and merchants of 80% of their wealth overnight to pay for their military failures. Corruption exploded as finance ministers like the infamous Ahmad Fonakati used the printing press to enrich themselves and their cronies like mob bosses. They created state monopolies on salt and iron, sold licenses for exorbitant prices, and confiscated merchant property under flimsy pretexts to fuel their own greed. Trust, the single most important element that makes fiat currency work, began to evaporate as people realized their paper was losing value by the hour, leading them to hoard silver coins and copper pots under their floorboards. This psychological inflation caused people to get rid of their paper money as fast as possible, buying anything tangible before the price went up again tomorrow, which only made the situation worse. When Kublai Khan died in 1294, the system was already cracking, and his successors lacked his authority and charisma to manage the growing unrest. They solved recurring budget shortfalls by ordering the printing presses to run even faster, ignoring the structural rot until it was too late to save the empire. Nature then delivered a final devastating kick when the Black Death arrived in the 1340s, traveling along the very same trade routes the Mongols had built and protected. The pandemic was a cruel irony, hitching a ride on fleas and rats to kill 30 to 50% of the population, causing agriculture to collapse and the tax base to evaporate. Famine followed pestilence, and the streets of Daedu were literally littered with worthless cash that vendors wouldn't trade for a single bag of rice as the government added zeros to their notes in a state of panic. The social contract was shattered, and the Chinese peasantry, who had seen their savings stolen by inflation and their families killed by plague, rose up in the Red Turban Rebellion. Led by an orphan monk named Yuan Dynasty, the rebels captured city after city, making bonfires of the worthless paper money as a symbolic rejection of the foreign Mongol system that had failed them. The Mongol army, unpaid and demoralized, crumbled against the rebels, and by the 1368, the last Yuan emperor fled back to the Mongolian steppes without a fight. The greatest land empire in history lasted less than a century in China, and the dream of Genghis Khan was erased from the landscape by a peasantry that had nothing left to lose. The new Ming dynasty completely abolished paper money, traumatized so deeply by hyperinflation that China would not trust paper currency again for nearly 500 years. They turned inward, restricted foreign trade, and rebuilt the Great Wall to keep out the outside world that had brought them plague and economic ruin, ending the golden age of global trade initiated by the Mongols. The fall of the Yuan Dynasty is more than just a dusty chapter in history. It is a lesson that while a state can create an infinite amount of money, it cannot create infinite value. Genghis Khan conquered the world on horseback, but his sons lost it with a printing press, proving that when a government abuses the trust of its people, the miracle of finance turns into a nightmare of revolution.